and welcome to the USAII Hackathon 2026. I want to begin with a question that has nothing to do with technology. How do democracies die? I'm not speaking about the coup or the tanks in the street, because that version is rare. The version we should worry about is slower, quieter, and much harder to see coming. My name is Dr. Anne-Elisabeth Courrier, and I am an associate professor in comparative law at Nantes University in France. I am also a visiting fellow at Emory University in Atlanta and living in there. And I am the founder of LEDI, a company working at the intersection of AI, ethics, law, and governance. In 2018, two Harvard political scientists, Levitsky and Ziblatt, published a book that answered this question in a way that surprised a lot of people. They found that democracies rarely collapse suddenly. Instead, they erode from the inside, often legally, and often with popular support. And the warning signs were always there, in the language, in the behavior, in the patterns of how political power was communicated. That observation is the starting point for this session. If those warning signs were always present in the words and the tone and the shifts over time, perhaps we can build an AI system that can read them carefully, transparently, and without becoming the thing we are trying to prevent. For this, I would like to suggest working on an AI system dedicated to this topic. Obviously, this is a rigorous topic, but one where you can learn quickly. And by the end of this session, you will be able to apply ethics by design to a real AI system, identify the legal framework to a high-risk AI application, understand what security and robustness mean when democratic accountability is at stake. You will be able to design a governance structure and transfer this full-dimensional thinking, AI, ethics, law, governance, to any project that you will build. These 5 outcomes go beyond this topic. They are the skills that you need to build AI responsibly in any context for any domain. So let's go to the central question. How do democracies die? Look at those maps showing the evolution of democracies between 2023 and 2025. You can find them on the website of the VDUM Institute at the University of Gothenburg, and they gather the most comprehensive empirical democracy dataset ever built. 202 countries, 600 indicators, data going back to 1789. The trend line for liberal democracy has been declining for nearly 2 decades. Not everywhere, not uniformly, but the direction is consistent, and researchers call it the democratic backsliding. The VDUM Democracy Report 2025 confirms it deepened further in 2023. And so here is our central question. If we can measure democratic health at the country level, can we measure the signal that precedes the erosion at the level of the individual political communication? And if we can do that, how do we do it without becoming the very threat we are trying to prevent? That double question, can we, should we, and how to do that, is the architecture of everything that follows. The answer is yes, we can build this, but only with very specific conditions. And so let's build the foundations first. The academic foundation. So Levitsky and Ziblatt identify 4 behavioral indicators that appear consistently before the democratic breakdown. In this table, you will find the indicators and what it looks like in language and behavior. The first indicator is a rejection of democratic rules. That means that we are questioning or we hear questioning about the electoral legitimacy, the election. We are undermining the courts, calling to suspend constitutional processes. The second indicator looks like framing rivals as criminals and enemies and not political competitors. The third one is about the political violence, and it looks like failing to condemn the support of violence and instead normalizing the violent metaphor, associating this with groups that use the force. The fourth indicator is a willingness to curtail the civil liberties. And so that means that it looks like endorsing restrictions on the press, on the judiciary, on minority rights, for example, but it is framed in a way that use the words national security or efficiency measures. These 4 indicators were also completed by 2 structural norms: the mutual toleration, accepting the opponents as legitimate, and what they call the institutional forbearance, that means a restraint not to use every legal power available. Both erode in language before they erode in action. And this is where it is interesting for us, right? So continuing on this, I would like to introduce you to the work made by Hannah Arendt on the origin of totalitarianism. Arendt showed that totalitarianism begins in thought and language before it becomes structure. Her concept of the banality of evil, that means the catastrophic outcomes produced by ordinary people who stop thinking critically, is a direct design constraint for this system. And she considered that instead, human deliberation will and should and must remain in the loop. Erica Chenoweth now. Chenoweth, coming also from Harvard University, built the most rigorous quantitative dataset on political violence and civil resistance. Her work provides both features and validation benchmarks for the violence normalization indicator in our system. Cass Sustein, coming from the Harvard Law School, gave us a norm called cascade theory. That means that the democratic norms can erode suddenly after a long apparent stability. This is why the system must track the rate and the direction of change and not just the current values. A sudden shift is more significant than a stable extreme. Barbara Geeds, coming from UCLA, provide the comparative framework for reading language patterns across different regime types globally. That means that signals coming from a Western liberal democracy may carry entirely different weight in a post-colonial or an hybrid regime context. And this brings us to Hofstede, who worked on the culture and the ways we can shape cultures in different contexts. For this, he mapped six dimensions to shape the culture in a country or in an organization. The first dimension is the power distance, meaning that what is our relationship in this particular context with the power? The second one is individualism. What is our relationship to individualism in this country, in this context? The third one is about uncertainty. Do we want to avoid uncertainty or are we resilient in this context? The fourth one is about long-term orientation. Are we looking in this context for long-term analysis or short-term? The fifth is indulgence, and the sixth is masculinity. And you can see that these 6 dimensions provide the calibration layer without which any globally applied AI system will systematically misread political communication. That means that it is a way to understand a context. That means that we have to be careful, but at the same time, it is a cultural calibration as a core design requirement for our AI system. So now, after the academic foundation, let's go to the AI system itself. The concept, the data, and the outputs. Beginning by what it reads, and so the corpus. The system operates exclusively on the public political record. That means that we will look only on speeches, parliamentary transcripts, press statements, voting records, everything that is in the public domain, but nothing obviously from the private life, not family, not about health, not about religion. That boundary is absolute. You will find the data you need as free data sets and publicly accessible at the end of this presentation. After the public corpus and what it reads, we can focus on what it measures. And what it measures the 4 indicators families that we spoke about in NLP. Applied to the corpus, the system and the AI system use NLP to detect and track the 4 Levitsky-Ziblatt indicators. Remember them? The institutional rejection language, the opponent framing shifts, the violence normalization, and the civil liberties curtailment framing. We must not forget about the 5th variable with the Hofstede cultural calibration, which allows us to adjust the 4 indicators in a political or in a cultural context. What it produces then, the output will not be a score. It is a dashboard of disaggregated, independently and auditable indicators. Each indicator shows the current values, the trajectory over time, and the source text that generated it. Finally, a plain language explanation of what it measures and what it does not claim. The system, this AI system, produces information for human deliberation and not a decision. Think of it as a health monitor. The health monitor monitor, but it's not a diagnosis per se. It's not, and it cannot be a verdict. So we must now, for this, in order to make the difference and being sure that it is not a score, we need to examine the full set of prohibition. And this will be the next segment. The risk management. Now that we understand the system, let us examine the risks and the responsibility for it. We will look at 4 different dimensions: ethical, legal, security, and governance. These interact, they work together. They are the 4 lenses on the same design challenge. The ethical challenges first. We have privacy, obviously, private life, family, health, religions is out of scope. Privacy is very important to be respected. And this is not a matter of it is a matter of human dignity before being a matter of law, right? Bias, and especially the NIST, the US NIST, built an AI risk management framework in which they categorize and classify the bias in historical bias, representation bias, measurement bias, and automation bias. What you have to do when you are building this AI system, you have to name them at every design stage, you have to design against them, and you have to make sure that there is an audit for them continuously. You will find the reference for the NIST AI framework at the end of this presentation. Autonomy and human dignity. Obviously, this is because we have disaggregated indicators, it allows us to preserve the requirements of the human judgment. And Arendt was very clear about it. The system must never reduce a person to a number. Then the legal challenges. Obviously, it depends on the context and the framework, the legal framework that are developed in one or the other countries or region. First of all, in some legal framework, political opinion is set up as a special category data. That means that it requires explicit legal basis for processing. And so that means that, especially if I'm taking the example of the EU AI Act, it is considered as being part of a high risk under the EU AI Act Annex 3. That means that we have special obligations if we want to do an AI system about it. We have to respect and trigger mandatory conformity assessment. We have special obligation under transparency and special obligations under human oversight. Another legal challenge that we can meet, depending on the geolocation that we are considering, we cannot do it as an automated decision. That means that the disaggregated indicator architecture is crucial. We cannot have a composite score or a binding output in Europe. And we must, on the contrary, design a system to keep the human deliberation in the loop. Obviously, it is not possible in Europe to do biometric inference, meaning that we cannot calculate the voice strength nor the facial expression, or look at the emotional state detection. These are prohibited in Europe. So that means that they are legally bad and so fundamentally incompatible with the system that operates on a person that has chosen to say publicly. Then transparency and explainability in Europe, they are really something that we have to respect. Every indicator must have a plain language explanation, a source traceability, and a published methodology. Opacity in Europe is not acceptable, legally or ethically. So you see that depending on the region you're looking at, the legal challenges might be different. Then look at the security and robustness. This system is a high-value political target, obviously. That means that security should not be considered just as an engineering detail here. It is also a democratic requirement, and meaning that we need to make sure that the system has integrity and trust and is trustworthy. So that means that, and you have to realize that a compromised accountability system is worse than no accountability system because it would produce false confidence. So the question of the responsibility for the system integrity is an ethical obligation and not just a technical one. This means that we have to follow and to comply with key requirements regarding security. For example, we must ensure immutable historical record with cryptographic audit trail. We must respect and comply with algorithm in cold storage, zero trust access architecture, mandatory independent penetration testing, and infrastructures disclosed to supervisory authorities. Finally, obviously, cybersecurity is a must. That means that the system must be resilient against data poisoning, model inversion, output manipulation, and this should be demonstrated, especially in Europe and in the European Union, under conformity assessment. Now, We look at the governance. Governance means that we have to make sure that certain steps and guardrails are respected, are organized. So I already mentioned transparency and explainability. So let's focus rather on accountability and appeal rights. Accountability should be ensured by an independent custody, meaning that a multi-stakeholder body, not a government agency, not a party, not a private company, not a single actor holding a controlling stake, instead a multi-stakeholder body. And obviously we need to organize a system for appeal. That means that every individual assessed has the right, assessed because of his political language, has the right, to rectification, to human review, and to individual remedy, and this with prior notice. Access to indicators and the sources and formal appeal should be organized before any output is used officially, and these are non-negotiable. So finally, with all these risk management advices, what you can build? What can you actually build this week with this framework? I'm going to give you three entry points, three options. All the three use a datasets list at the end of this presentation. All three are technically buildable. All three connect directly to what we have discussed, and they are not ranked. That means that you must choose the one that fits your team. Option one is about language shift detection. That means that you take a public speech corpus, you apply the NLP to detect the shift in the Levitsky and Ziblatt indicators over time, and you visualize the trajectory with the source traceability. You look at the language shift detection. Option B is a bias audit. That means that you take a political text classifier, you apply the NIST AI framework bias categories, and you document what the model gets wrong and why, and you propose mitigation. You look at bias and you audit the bias. Option C is a transparency and governance dashboard. That means that you design the output interface through which a human oversight body would see, interrogate, and act on the indicators. Obviously, you include an appeal workflow. Whichever option you choose, document your ethical and legal reasoning at each decision point. That documentation is part of the deliverable. That is how ethics by design becomes visible. So now, and before closing, I would like to give you the promised data sets, references, and also the equivalent legal frameworks showing the global diversity of them. I spoke a lot about Europe because it is quite a rigorous one, but each of them are different. So make sure that you look at the right one. And for closing, I would like to refer to a quote from Hannah Arendt. She wrote that the most dangerous political condition is not the presence of evil actors. It is the absence of thinking, the absence of thinking. And indeed, you are building AI at a moment when the relationship between technology and democratic governance is genuinely unresolved. The tools you create will either strengthen democratic accountability or quietly hollow it out. There is no neutral position. What is needed and what we need you is to build, and we need builders who take AI capability, ethics, law and governance seriously, together and from the beginning. Thank you so much for your attention and good luck, students. Have a good week.